We hear now Armchair Astronomy with members of the American Museum Hayden Planetarium staff talking to WBAI's David W. Teskey.
This is the 49th in our continuing series of programs on astronomy. Contributing their time and knowledge to this venture are members of the American Museum Hayden Planetarium staff. They come hoping to give us laymen a fuller understanding of our universe. Today's program will be the first of two programs on life beyond the Earth. With us today is astronomer Dr. Kenneth L. Franklin, Dr. Franklin M. Brandley, and Dr. Thomas D. Nicholson of the American Museum Hayden Planetarium. Welcome, all of you, and Dr. Nicholson, will you begin?
To get into our discussion today, Ken and Frank, suppose that we look into a bit of the history of this whole question, is there life beyond the Earth? It has gone through many vagaries and variations in the history of the world that we know of.
If you go way back into history, say 1,000, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, there's probably no question of life any place but right here, and we were just beings that belonged here.
Well, you're talking about an era now when men never thought of the objects which they saw in the sky as bearing any resemblance at all to the Earth. The Earth was apart from everything else in the universe.
Right, they were celestial and special.
Yeah.
Well, their whole life was limited to their immediate surroundings. They didn't even have a conception that there were other creatures on this planet, if you go back far enough.
Right. Well, now this is based then wholly upon their experience. But things changed. By the time we get up into the Renaissance, people were beginning to think about there being life in other places. And I would say, probably by the 1600s, the time of Kepler and thereabouts, we began to understand that the planets were bodies like the Earth. When Copernicus had the planets and the Earth revolving around the sun, instead of all of these bodies being very strange and revolving around the Earth, he made the Earth like one of the planets. And now you can begin to wonder, if the Earth is like any of these other planets, maybe they have life on them like we do, and maybe the moon has life, and maybe the sun has life, and then there are life in the stars. So they got a little bit wild about it.
We keep coming back to Galileo time and time again, because I think much of this began with Galileo's observation of the moon and his comments in Sidereus Nuncius that what he saw of the moon was like the Earth. He saw mountains, and he saw valleys and plains, and therefore he likened the moon to the Earth.
Right.
And the assumption then, well, this was the first real understanding of the fact that objects which we saw in the sky were essentially like the Earth in many ways, because he saw it to be like the Earth.
Well, he did definitely see it along about 1610 or thereabouts. But before this, Kepler, in his allegorical dream, had talked about beings existing in and from the moon. It's a real allegory. It's science fiction for his time, and he had to take a great deal of effort to try and explain what he was talking about. But it's an interesting exercise in the fact that he did have feelings about life being elsewhere from here. So it's not only beginning with Galileo, but Galileo gave it a great deal of support by finding that the moon does resemble the Earth in some way. At least so he interpreted it.
Then this whole idea persisted for centuries up to the time of the Great Moon Hoax.
Oh, the Great Moon Hoax.
Herschel. And actually, it seems to me that this was a device to capitalize upon this kind of interest that people had in life beyond the Earth.
Well, the Great Moon Hoax was an outgrowth of the fact that up until that time, the early part of the 19th century, not just uninformed persons, but astronomers and other scientists as well, simply accepted the fact that if there was life on this object, there could be life on all the other objects of the sky, which, so far as they knew, were similar to this one. And this extended, by the way, beyond the planets. This extended right to the sun and to the stars. They felt they, too, from the little they knew about their nature, might well have life on them. They didn't question the fact that this was a possibility.
Your talk about the Great Moon Hoax, perhaps we should explain it slightly. Sir John Herschel went down to South Africa to do some work down there with a new instrument, and the communications were rather slow in those days. I think this was in the 1830s, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
And about this time, a very imaginative person working for the New York Sun decided that this would be a good time to step up circulation of the newspaper. So he began to get dispatches, in quotes, from Sir John Herschel about the wonderful things he was discovering about the moon and all about the inhabitants of the moon and their sociology and anatomy and everything else.
Fabulous cities.
Presumably because of this wonderful new telescope he had to look at them with.
Yeah.
Right. Well, of course, Sir John never did anything of the kind, and it took several months, and only the New York Sun was publishing any of this information, none of the other newspapers, and they began to get rather suspicious. And I think they actually shipped somebody down to Sir John to find out about this, and he thought the whole thing was highly amusing. But the other newspapers didn't, and they exposed this hoax, and it lasted for several months, and people bought up the newspapers like mad. It was a very successful promotion scheme.
You know, I never followed through on that to find out whether the reporter was fired or whether he became publisher.
Well, that's the way of the newspaper world, at least in those days. And the very fact that it was so successful is an illustration of the fact that nobody doubted this sort of thing at that time. And as I say, this was only about 130, 40 years ago.
Accepted it very easily.
Well, the changes occurred later, however, when we began to have in astronomy techniques which allow us to determine the physical nature of the surface of the planets and of their atmospheres and their temperatures and so forth. We call this astrophysics. Mainly, this was the spectrograph and heat sensing devices that we can use with telescopes and so on. We began to find out that the moon had absolutely no atmosphere. Well, now this makes it very difficult to think about life on the moon. We began to find out that the sun was a very, very hot body, having a temperature of the order of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and this seems to preclude life. And we found out that Mars was a questionable item. We couldn't tell too much about it at all. It was sort of a borderline case. Venus, you couldn't say anything about it because it's loaded with clouds and you can't see down to the surface of it. The other planets turned out to be very cold, except for Mercury, which was very hot.
And also very cold.
And very cold at times on the other side of it. But this sort of killed the whole subject for a long time about there being life anywhere else in the solar system. So then people worried about other solar systems. Then this brought up the question, well, how frequent are planets? Are
Before
they
you go
common
into
or
that,
not?
Karen, when you say it killed off the subject, not quite. The subject remained pretty hot and pretty controversial, especially toward the end of the 19th and the early part of the 20th century, with the renewed interest in the planet Mars, following the very close oppositions of, what was it, 1877?
1877, right.
true.
This was the one planet which wasn't ruled out by the physics that was...
This was the
that had been
borderline
developed.
case, right.
This was the one which the physics showed had an atmosphere, had a temperature somewhat lower than Earth standards, but still within the range of possibility, had an atmosphere in which, although they could discover no evidence of oxygen and water vapor, yet they could not find anything in the atmosphere which could preclude life, as
Right.
in the case of Jupiter and Saturn.
With their methane and ammonia
Yes.
atmospheres.
So, and then coupled with this, there were the observations of features on Mars by Schiaparelli and Flammarion and others that followed him, which they ascribed or called canals. And then
Percival Lowell.
I was going to say a promoter, and he was a promoter so far as
yes.
Mars is
A
concerned.
very
Yes.
persuasive person.
He took up the cudgels for Mars and stimulated a great deal of interest in not just the possibility that there was life on Mars, but as far as Lowell was concerned, the probability that there was life on Mars.
Well,
and for many decades, this was
Well,
debated.
he traveled all around the world lecturing on this, and as I understand it, he was a very persuasive lecturer. And once you heard him, you were convinced he was right.
Well, I
Well,
read his books,
you
and he's a
can read
very
his
persuasive
books.
writer, too.
Right.
Yes.
Well, he had some strong arguments. Unfortunately, they were not really backed by a great deal of scientific evidence, but a great deal of scientific argument. Very interesting books that he has written about this, and this is true. It started, the impetus was really given to this by Schiaparelli's discovering of these hairline features, which he called canali, which really should have been translated channels. I really believe that if it had been translated channels in English instead of the cognate word canali, canals, that a great deal of time would not have been wasted, more to the real objective observation of the planet rather than a subjective looking for features of civilization. This is what Lowell was really trying to do.
Oh, sure.
But I might point out that there are still arguments about whether or not those so-called canals are features that are manufactured by intelligent beings for some special purpose or whether they're natural. Not only 5 years ago, there was a discussion in one of the technical journals about the network and whether or not the networks were like natural cracks or whether they were like many intersecting lines in places like the railroads that we have in the United States, where they all come, several of them come together in various cities, or like the airlines, where they come together in various places. And there was quite a statistical argument in favor of the fact that they were representing something of, on the basis of intelligence.
But they didn't show up on Mariner 4 photographs.
Well, it was not the right season for Mariner 4 when it got there to show up the canals in any prominence. And then it was only about 1% of the surface that was seen anyway. I'm sure that there will be other expeditions like Mariner 4 that will someday find something that looks like what we think of it as a canal here.
At any rate, because of the Martian question, this interest in the possibility that there could be life beyond the Earth never really died. It continued to be quite a hot discussion right up through the 20s and into the 30s. Then I would guess after Lowell's death, much of the interest in the possibility of life on Mars, among astronomers at any rate, seemed to die with him. And then the question of life on planets beyond the Earth seemed to be pretty well resolved into a negative attitude toward the planets in the solar system.
Well, yes, it was about this time when we began to get the idea that life as we know it could not exist on these things. So that little phrase, as we know it, was always the hedge. And of course, it's a perfectly good hedge. This brings out, still from the astronomy point of view, the question of whether or not there are other planets, because after all, you have to have a planet on it. But from the biology point of view, it brings out the question of what is life.
What is life? That's right.
And can it be based on other things than the carbon chemistry that we have here? Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen. This is, I think, still an open question in the minds of some biochemists, whereas in others it's completely closed. There is no other possibility for life except the chemistry that we understand now. Since we're talking about life, we might as well define it, and I have found in a dictionary someplace a definition of life, and it's fairly general. The quality or character distinguishing an animal or a plant from inorganic or from dead organic bodies, which is especially manifested by metabolism, growth, reproduction, and internal powers of adaptation to environment. There's a fairly long, involved thing there, but then life is fairly complicated.
Yeah, it's fairly complicated, but according to that definition, you could have life existing under quite different conditions than those we ordinarily think are needed in order for life to exist.
Well, especially manifested by metabolism. What's this mean?
Well, metabolism, I think, means intake of food of some sort and the production of energy, the giving off of waste products.
Well, it is
taking
taking materials out of the environment and reorganizing them into a structure.
Yeah, using them from growth, apparently, and for energy.
Right, right. So there is, it requires energy. You require energy to exist.
Right.
Reproduction. Now you have to replicate the organism in some fashion. But you can replicate crystals. But I think there's a problem of energy here. When a crystal is formed, it releases energy. Whereas when you duplicate something in a life process, you have to use energy for it. I think maybe this has something to do with it.
I don't know. This is an area where really a biologist is required rather than people with our limited knowledge of biology.
Well, that's quite so, but in terms of what we can talk about here, we sort of have to stick with a definition like this, and we should have a biologist to amplify some
I
of
always
these
feel,
problems.
though, Ken, when you're talking about life beyond the Earth, that you just have to establish some ground rules. And I think when you get into this area of life as we do not understand it, then the whole area is wide open, and of course it could exist. I think if you limit yourself to, is there life as we comprehend of it existing in some other location in the universe, this becomes a much easier kind of thing to move around in.
Well, yes, but on the other hand, it limits us too. We understand, we think we understand our form of life, but maybe there are other forms of life that would be capable of communicating with us with the use of the electromagnetic spectrum in some fashion.
Yeah.
And still, if we went there, we wouldn't recognize it as life.
Yeah. Sulfur creatures, maybe, or something.
Yes, or silicon creatures. I remember reading a science fiction story many years ago which had life based upon silicon instead of carbon. Chemically, these elements are quite a bit alike.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was a rock.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe there is a life like rock someplace, but would we recognize it? Was this definition of life that I've just read broad enough to include such things? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But this is the way we see life. And of course, when we define life, we have to define the life that we understand.
That's right.
So, in a sense, this definition of life is the definition that fits our form of life.
Mm-hmm. This is a definition of the processes which we can identify in living objects that distinguish them from non-living objects.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This definition doesn't at all indicate the limitations of the environment on the existence of life or the non-existence of life. This kind of a definition, for example, could be applied to a form of life that might exist elsewhere, regardless of the circumstances of the place, regardless of the physical conditions of the place where this thing was found. If, in other words, we should find something anywhere in the universe which fulfilled these processes, we would have to define it as living by our standards right
Yes.
now. But there are other things besides these processes which can be used to define life. One thing we know about life on the Earth requires liquid, for example. We have to have something. You mentioned a moment ago that somewhere in the universe there might be a rock which was living. But so far as we know on the Earth, life requires some liquid to transport or to carry out the metabolism, which is a basic function of life.
Right.
So that should we find a rock in some other universe, although we would find...
Maybe you find a wet rock.
A wet rock? Well, even so, we have to find a rock which had some form of liquid. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that from this definition of life and the processes which are essential to it, can we identify the environment or the limitations to the environment in which this kind of thing would be possible?
It turns out that water is just about the universal solvent. You have to have a fluid which is capable of dissolving and carrying in solution the chemical elements necessary for metabolism, growth, reproduction, and so forth.
Well, that's my point.
That's your point exactly.
My
right.
point is, therefore, now we're concerned about the possibility that life might exist beyond the Earth. So we can see in the definition of life processes as we see it, as we accept them here, one limitation to the possibility that life might exist somewhere else. Does this somewhere else have some universal solvent, such as
Wouldn't
water?
have to be water.
It wouldn't have to be water, but does it
No.
have some substitute for water? which
But
is
it's a
in
very
purpose?
common substance, water. It's got hydrogen and
Common
oxygen.
On the
Right.
Earth.
No,
Not only on the Earth.
it's made up of very common elements.
Right,
in
it's
the
common
universe.
in the
In
entire
the
universe.
This
Right.
is true.
Right.
Right. At least the ingredients are common.
The ingredients are common. Now then,
And so is the water molecule.
the water molecule. Well, in the conditions that allow the molecule to exist.
Right. It does exist where conditions are
Yeah.
suitable for it. It
Right.
exists in the surfaces of stars, apparently, the water molecule.
This is so for stars that are cooler than about 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, at that temperature, the water molecule will break up. However, in those stars, the water is in the form of individual molecules. There's not in the liquid state. So we can't necessarily have it. I don't know. Maybe we could have it in a gaseous state someplace, but you have to have some coherence in the various molecules that make up the organism that we're talking about. They have to hang together. They cannot be individual molecules just floating around someplace. Mm-hmm. So they have to be confined to some kind of a physical entity somehow, a solid or semi-solid mass. Mm-hmm. It can't be just loose molecules as in a gas.
Well, our concern is primarily with the astronomy of the question, not really with the biochemistry of the question.
That's correct.
We really shouldn't be concerning ourselves with the physical characteristics which define life. What we're concerned with is, can we identify, or is it possible ever to identify, places in the universe where life such as we know it might exist?
Well, I know, but we have
Well,
to...
let's consider the solar system first, I think.
We've just about ruled that out a few moments ago.
Yes, I think we're just about taking care of the solar system.
Well, we've ruled out what
to date,
generally higher forms of life,
higher forms.
We say. Now, what does this mean? This means that from what we can observe in the universe, forms of life such as the higher forms of animals and plants which we know on Earth, which apparently require fairly moderate temperatures, fairly large supplies of water vapor, fairly large supplies of oxygen, these apparently cannot exist in any of the other planets of the solar system. However, we don't rule out the possibility that lower, primitive forms of life could exist in some of the other places of the solar system.
Well, now, define your lower primitive forms of life.
A form of life which would be capable of existence under much greater extremes of temperature than the higher forms of animal and plant life we know, that would be capable of existing with much lower concentrations of water vapor or water, much lower concentrations of oxygen than are required by the higher forms of life.
Of which there are many. There are many forms of life. There are many forms of life
known on Earth.
Known on Earth that can exist
survive
under these extremes.
That's the point. So when we rule out the possibility of life among the planets of the solar system, we are ruling out the possibility of the higher forms of animal and plant life that require these relatively limiting conditions that we know. But here on the Earth, as Frank alluded to, there are organisms that do live under rather extreme conditions which would not support higher forms of animal or vegetable life.
Not in any efficiency.
I think, too, you could adapt a fairly common organism, plant or animal, to extreme conditions if you took it gradually.
Well,
I don't know if this can be done or not.
Yes, it can be done and has been done, because we have to think also about what processes took place to originate the life here. We have to think about the formation of the planet, the Earth, and what has happened to its history. Now, obviously, the Earth was not always the same way as it is now, and the current theories of the idea of the formation of life has it forming out of hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen that were not in the forms that we see them today. Mm-hmm. In general, we have thought of the Earth's past as being with an atmosphere very much like the atmosphere of Jupiter or Saturn today, that is, chiefly with methane and ammonia in it. Now, we think of these things as being anathema to life. Well, it is, as we know it now. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, this was in a gaseous form, and all we have to have is water available. And a very classic experiment back about 1950 by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey at the University of Chicago put together a mixture like this and bombarded it for about a week with sparks or ultraviolet light in different experiments. And in each case, they came out with a mixture in this soup that had the building blocks for amino acids in them. Now, these are the first step toward proteins. Now, this was a big step in our understanding of the origin of life. Now, certainly, if this were the case, then we had organisms developed from these things that could exist in this atmosphere, which we would find very detrimental to us now. Gradually, as the atmosphere changed, the organism had to change with the atmosphere.
Evolutionary process.
Evolutionary process. So now those did change from that primitive condition up to the condition that we have now. It turns out that you can have life in conditions like that, but the life is not very efficient. When we change to an oxidizing atmosphere from a reducing atmosphere, the life processes turn out to be much more efficient and capable of evolving higher forms. So if we find a place in the solar system or in the universe which has this primitive type of atmosphere, such as in Jupiter, maybe we can have a life form existing there. And this has been thought of quite recently, as a matter of fact, that maybe there are life forms existing in the atmosphere of Jupiter. We can look at Jupiter now and say, well, it's loaded with ammonia and methane and hydrogen, free hydrogen. We know that it must also have some water there, but
Terrific
not
lightning discharges. too.
maybe terrific lightning discharges. Certainly there is a fantastic supply of weather in a place like Jupiter. And the tops of the clouds are cold. So we can say, well, now this precludes a lot of this. But as you get deeper, deeper down into the atmosphere, the temperature will go up, and the pressure of the atmosphere will go up, and this will keep water fluid at higher temperatures. And again,
Because the temperature is trapped by the
the temperature
atmosphere
is somewhat
and-
trapped by the atmosphere
and,
itself.
and also probably the core of the planet is producing heat.
Well, it may well be
Through
producing
nuclear
heat
reactions.
through, well, I wouldn't say nuclear reactions, but
Radioactive.
radioactivity. These are
Quite
nuclear reactions, but
Yeah.
they're not in the same sense
Right.
that we think of them in the stars. But in any event, it's quite feasible, quite possible, that there is some primitive life form existing in the atmosphere or maybe on whatever surface that Jupiter may have. But we would expect only primitive life forms there because on our present understanding we would not figure out how Jupiter's atmosphere could change to an oxidizing atmosphere from the reducing form that it has. So maybe life would never develop very far on Jupiter until such a thing did take place.
You know, which would mean a radical change in its position in the solar system, or
No,
something quite inconceivable.
I think something internal would have to happen, not a change of its position in the solar system, because it's got the temperature necessary. Now this comes back to what
You think it has?
inside.
At some point in its atmosphere.
In some
it should
point.
have.
Yeah.
In some zone.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the outside temperature is about 150 degrees below zero, 200 degrees below
Yeah,
zero.
yeah.
But down inside, it may get up to around 800 or 900 degrees. It may. This is just a theory. But it's a theory based upon everything we know. And this is a possibility. So the
So
temperature
there'd be
does...
some region in between where the temperature would be favorable
Right,
to
right.
evolution.
This is the idea. Now, this doesn't say it does exist, but this is a possibility.
Well, up to this point, Ken, just to summarize, we've considered only the possibility of life among the planets of the solar system. And to summarize, we rather generally rule out among any of the planets the possibility that there could be higher forms of life that could communicate with us, for example. On the other hand, we must admit today the possibility that life, as we have defined it earlier by the processes which are characteristic of living things, life could exist in some form on, let's face it, almost any of the planets of the solar system, except possibly Mercury and Pluto,
And many of the satellites.
possibly even on some of the satellites of
Yeah.
the solar system.
Well, we have to know more about these bodies first.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. We have been listening to astronomers Dr. Kenneth L. Franklin, Dr. Franklin M. Branley, and Dr. Thomas D. Nicholson of the American Museum Hayden Planetarium discussing life beyond the Earth. We hope you will join us all next week when we will present the second program on this subject. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like discussed on future programs, indicate them by card or letter to Armchair Astronomy, WBAI, 30 East 39th Street, New York 16, New York. We will try to answer as many questions as possible in future programs. Until next week, good day.
This has been Armchair Astronomy with members of the American Museum Hayden Planetarium staff talking to WBAI's David W. Teskey.